Hey guys, welcome to OCD Real Talk. Just me and Elliot on a one-to-one over here. We just thought we'd do like a quick real talk check-in, because we don't do it that frequently anymore, so it would be good to do that. So we were just discussing different topics that we think we can tackle, and I think like a good one that Elliot has come up with is comparing what if situations with real life scenarios, because I think Elliot, you and I both probably get this question quite a lot, which is
Mhm.
like trying to draw that line in the sand of
Yeah.
when do you know that you should break up, or when do you know that you should go for a checkup to the doctor or something like that.
Mhm.
um so if I throw that question out to you, just like out in the open, kind of like
Yeah, absolutely.
what's your usual answer for that question?
Yeah, so I think it's all about not making decisions in the moment and acting on that urge, right? And with the doctor example you just gave there, mom, in what I tend to do is, or with me or with a customer, if they say that they think they have a health scare or a health issue, right? What I tend to say is, look, try not to, if possible, unless it's absolutely urgent, right? Try not to, in the moment, act upon that urge and get yourself straight down to the doctor as soon as you've had that intrusive thought or rumination, right? Because if you're acting on that thought in the moment with that urge, what can happen there is you're dancing with the devil a little bit. I'm not saying that there couldn't be something wrong, but you're almost poking the fire, you're poking the bear, and sort of reinforcing to the brain that that thing is scary and it needs urgent attention, and that's going to set off that compulsive path. So what I tend to say is, look, see if you can just delay it for a little bit. See if you can
Yeah.
hang on in there and not actually act upon that in the moment. And as well with the relationship as well, another example, right? You might have that urgent sort of desire to leave, that urge to break up, right? In that situation, I know it might not be as life and death as it is for the health fear, but again, it's good practice to actually sit with that urge and almost delay that decision to save you making a reckless decision and acting something that you're going to regret in that moment. Because, of course, OCD is going to make it feel as real as it can get, but I think, to save running the risk of poking the bear and stoking that fire, you can just absorb that discomfort and then make a decision, maybe in a period of time later, right? And
Yeah.
I think, especially with the relationship example as well, I think, and you might made this good point as well, Momin, like you're better off making a decision once the avoidance behaviors, once the compulsions, once the reassurance has all stopped, right? If you're making a decision on that relationship when you feel unsure, whilst you've still got all of these things going on, then of course the waters are going to be a lot more muddied anyway.
Yeah.
Right? So you'd really be better off making that decision and how you want to propel your life once you've really worked on all those compulsions and avoidance behavior. And that's still not necessarily going to guarantee certainty. But I think for me, especially in my case as well, with HOCD as well, like once I actually stopped all of those behaviors and control mechanisms, that was when the waters became a little bit clearer and less murkier going forward. And then I was able to propel my life in that direction that I wanted, whether it was that, whether it was work,
Yeah.
whatever. So I think, yeah, just to reiterate, taking a bit of time to make that decision, but then also dropping the safety behaviors around that and then, going forward from that
I
way.
I
Yeah.
usually go with a similar approach as well. Like I say to people, because obviously, like in the moment, I can't say to them, "No, you should stay," or "No, you should," like
Yeah.
because I mean, yeah. But my main thing is, here's how I see it. One thing is me trying to prevent people from making impulsive decisions and quick decisions because that's what they really desperately want to do. So trying to cut back on that. Secondly, highlighting for them that okay, I'm not saying that you can never break up, right?
Mm.
So because I think that's important for me to highlight for them, because sometimes it can feel like, so are you telling me I have to stay in this forever? No, I mean, I'm not taking that choice completely away from you. In the end, it is your choice if you still want to leave, right? But what I am saying is that trying not to make that impulsive decision right now, buy yourself a little bit more time, right? The
Mm.
decision in the end still might be the same. Like let's say like 6 months later you think that oh you still okay, now you have maybe come to a bit more of a balanced mindset of thinking that okay, I still want to break up, but it'll at least be a more informed decision rather than something that
Yeah.
is kind of like that you're just making in the moment, right? And
Yeah.
when I say also informed decision, because sometimes people will be in a relationship for like I don't know 6-7 years and they're like, how much more informed do I need to be? But for me, being informed isn't equal to the time that you spent in the relationship ruminating about it. Because rumination is not being informed about it. Informed is, have you spent enough time trying to look at it from different angles, also cutting your behaviors and compulsions as well and making those significant changes, and
Yeah,
then seeing how you feel. That for me is being more informed. So the decision in the end still might be the same of like, hey, I think I want to break up, and I think it's sad. But
yeah,
the thing is, when you do it impulsively, the chances of you going into, from what's that metaphor from uh the fire into the frying pan? I'm completely forgetting my idioms right now. But
yeah. I can't remember.
yeah, I was
But,
the fire into the frying pan, whatever it is, but you get the
yeah,
point.
yeah,
But like it's going to be that situation because you're just going to go from one chaos to the next. Because what happens, and you and I have seen this so many times, when people do like that compulsive breakup with their partners, the next day immediately guilt washing over them, and it's like, oh
yeah,
shit, maybe I've made a mistake, maybe I need to go back. And then they try and patch up things with their partner like immediately, and sometimes they get back together. But then at that point, like, it's so unsteady at that point that even the relationship is just realistically it's becoming chaotic, because obviously the partner is also like, okay, this person wants to break up with me one point and then completely changing his mind the other, and it's just so
yeah,
volatile. So to
yeah,
avoid that is, I mean, I all that to avoid that chaos as well, it's so important
yeah.
to delay your decisions and try and work on things in a different manner than that you haven't tried before.
Yeah, I think it's very much changing yourself before you try and change the other person. All right,
Yeah.
and I think
Or the
sometimes in our
situation, or
yeah,
the situation. Try and change yourself
yeah,
before others or the situation.
yeah, and there's an example that I've seen in my sort of in my coaching with helping others. Like there's a situation where this person thinks that it's a communication problem from the standpoint of the partner. You know, they're not communicating enough. But
Yeah,
what me and Sam and this girl who will know we're talking about when she's watching, but what me and Sam said, try and like sort of change your own belief systems and your own perspectives before
yeah,
you try and change the other person. And again, we're not saying that you can't ever raise that with your partner, but
yeah.
the strong shoulds and musts that you're holding about them and that they have to do, that is just causing that stir within you, and it's actually making you a little bit more paralyzed and not actually able to make that decision, right? So working on those belief systems and your own irrational belief set is going to be really helpful in your relationship. And I think as well, I had this with like my job and career, right? So I'd
Yeah.
always be looking around for the next best career. I went through loads of different jobs in a short space of time, back in my early 20s, and it wasn't the job that was the problem. It was my perspectives of the
Yeah.
job, right? It was the must that I was told in the shoulds. You know, I must be having this X amount of money. I must have this responsibility. I must be enjoying it a lot. And then, like, it just wasn't the job's problem. It was my own perspectives. And where did it get me? To what end did that get me?
Yeah.
Just churning through lots of different jobs and searching out for that next best thing. And it was almost like you're on a
And
hamster wheel looking for that next best thing. Yeah,
and
and
like, this is where like context really, really, really matters. I mean, I
yeah,
always highlight this in my videos, in my posts and whatnot. Like, I can't just sit here and, like, if someone says that, or if just someone asks me like a blanket question of, how do I know that I need to again switch my job or not? Let's, even if we take that example,
yeah,
context matters so much as well. Like, I think a good example is this one guy that I'm working with who has a relationship OCD, right? I think like um he was telling me that, oh, my partner is, sometimes mean to me or rude to me and stuff like that, right? But he never specified what it was. So, and the thing with exactly what I was saying to you just a while back is, like, sometimes you have to take things what OCD sufferers say with a pinch of salt, because I
mm,
know even for myself as well how much my internal perspective was so skewed with things that the way I would describe and portray things was a little bit exaggerated as well at times. So, I mean, I
mm,
know how much it can completely, cloud your judgment about things as well. So, obviously, I was taking it with a pinch of salt as well when he was saying my partner is sometimes rude to me. But then I think, like, but he never specified exactly what it was or wasn't and stuff like that. He was kind of like very vague about it. So obviously we were discussing perspectives around, okay, changing your perspective around that and stuff like that. But then I think like a few calls later, he mentioned specific things that this is what, my partner says to me and this is how she speaks to me. Because I asked him one day, I was like, what kind of things does she say? And
Yeah,
when he told me that, I was like, okay, yeah, I agree with you. This is not great.
yeah,
Like so you have to, but at the same time, there have been other situations where someone has said that, oh, my loved one or whatever spoke to me in this way, or they were not nice to me in whatever way. And for me, that's like, and I can clearly see how much their OCD is making that completely an exaggerated case of like, oh shit, like, someone is so bad to me or disrespectful or whatever it is. So context over here does matter so, so, so much because I can't, like, even with job situations, by the way, this has happened with people who have discussed with me that I don't know if I should leave my job or stay in my job. I've tried to just investigate a little bit more as to see
mm,
like what is it that's going on, what is it that you find bad and whatnot, and looking at that uh, in the you can say larger you can timeline and history of their other fears as well. Like if they have a fear of, let's say, not being successful in general, then classically that's probably being projected onto their career timeline as well. So there's so many moving parts you have to look at it. You can't just be like,
yeah.
okay, in your case, or in all cases of OCD, this is what you do. Again, hard to say that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what can happen as well, people go too far the other way. So because they can get so scared of maybe saying the wrong thing and it maybe being a compulsion, then they just go within themselves and don't do anything at all. And that
Yeah.
actually might mean that they are putting up with a bad relationship or they are putting up with a bad job. So I think it's important in those moments, like you say, that moment, it's very contextual, but it also comes down to I think it's down to the intention as well. Like, what reason would I be raising this with my partner if there was a problem? What
Yes.
reason would it be? What reason would I have to want to leave this job? Would it be, fear of leaving the wrong job? Is it fear of being in the wrong relationship? So I think there is going to be, on a moment by moment basis, there is going to be a lot of uncertainty about what the right thing is to do. And there are going to be times when you feel a bit paralyzed and it's just going to feel easier
Yeah.
not to say anything and just shut yourself off in the room and just stay in that situation forever. So there's going to
Yeah.
have to be that element of you taking the risk in those moments. If you do feel like you're avoiding it too much,
Yeah.
maybe you're just not saying things to your partner. Maybe you're thinking you're putting up with the job for the sake of it. There is also going to be that element of, oh, what if I'm stoking the fire here in many ways? But again, like I said, it comes down to the intention of why you're doing that.
Yeah.
And as you work on
And
those belief systems that are driving that, that's going to be important. Yeah.
health OCD, I think, is also just an interesting example as well, because when people are coming in to say that, hey, like, um, I feel like I need to go to the doctor, or do you think I should go to the doctor or not?
Mm-hmm.
Chances are, by the time they're asking me, they've already either had multiple checkups or
Yeah.
consultations or spoken to like a doctor friend or cousin, or they have Googled the hell out of it or something like that, right? So chances are they've already done it. So I sometimes do ask, and I was like, okay, is this something that you ever have gotten checked before at all? And usually they say that, yeah, I've been to many doctors. I mean, that's, I would say, 99% of the time that is the answer, right? And
Yeah.
when you were speaking earlier about like the sense of urgency as well, right? I mean, so even that can be so arbitrary and gray in terms of like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, what is urgent? Because it does feel urgent. I am feeling that symptom. I am feeling something in my stomach or my head or whatever it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
But again, delaying that. By the way, interesting. I do work with a couple of people who have actual health issues and have health OCD as well.
Yeah.
Wherein for them, like their health issue is almost like a justification for them to do their what do you say,
Compulsions. Yeah.
compulsions as well, right? So
Yeah.
in that case, you have to navigate that line of like, I always say to them, I was like, look, I'm not denying that you have like maybe like a disease or something like that. Maybe you have like maybe even like an autoimmune condition or whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
But do you want that real life condition to become essentially the constant heavy cloud that you're just carrying around with you all the time? Or do
Mm.
you want to try and adapt to it and still try to live on your own terms and build a more balanced relationship with the concern that you have with that? Because if that's true, then every person who has any sort of lifelong health diagnosis or illness or syndrome or autoimmune problem or whatever it is would essentially just be in constant anxiety and depression. But we
Yeah.
see that that's not true because people mindset wise are like, okay, these are essentially the cards I've been dealt with. I'm just going to go to my prescribed checkups with the doctor and whatnot, and I'll just follow orders and that's all. Like
Yeah, absolutely. And I think even when you do get those, even when you do get that diagnosis, it's still trying important not to be engaging in that sort of check-in mechanisms, so compulsions, avoidance behaviors, whatever. So I'll give you an example. I mean, so I remember with me, I was having like heart trouble, right, and I was
yeah,
in the hospital for a day, and they found that I had an ectopic heartbeat, right. So it's when the beat comes a bit too early and then it delays. So there was actually a little issue there. It wasn't
yeah,
dangerous, but even in those moments, it's at times it still took over my life, right? Because I was still walking around checking my pulse, double checking on the internet that it was a structurally normal heart. So even in the event you do get that diagnosis or there is actually that thing wrong, again, we're not saying you can't ever get these things. Yeah, like Mum said there, it's still so important that you don't try and make it rule your life and you do still try and drop those safety behaviors, even though there can be some sort of credence for you checking that because you want to make sure it's fine. It's a very the lines are very blurred, and that
yeah,
crossover with real life is you're not going to be able to decipher that in all moments. But yeah, what you can do is try not to put your life on hold, still trying to do those things, making sure that you're not going down the compulsive route by double checking. Of
yeah.
course, still taking the doctor's advice, still taking the physician's advice, whatever that is. But yeah, not making it the center of your world and,
And
and, and
I
still
think
trying
like
to be good.
another
Yeah.
in trying to push people to delay those decisions or taking action or whatnot. I think the other thing is that like based on what the situation is, I've tried to give people like some windows of time. Like I think with job thing, for example, like I think there have been two, three different people who have a little bit of that, fear of being stuck in the wrong job or fear of not enjoying their job and stuff like that.
Passion and purpose. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And so I've basically like I've been like, hey, stick it out for 6 months.
Mm,
By the end of the 6 months, and we can have another conversation, and then we can evaluate where we are. Do we want to
mm,
leave? Do we want to switch? Do we want to stay? We'll see, right?
yeah.
I think in majority cases, I think like after 6 months, they're like, okay, I think I'm staying for another 6 months. So I'm like,
Yes.
let's see, like your initial kind of like urgency to leave it. I mean, I'm not saying the job is perfect. And I'm not taking away your choice to leave the job at some point as well, but like you also can recognize that you didn't need to make any urgent decision as
Yeah.
well. So,
Yeah.
I think like giving windows of time can also help because otherwise it can in the mind when you're hearing that advice of like no, just stay in the job, it can feel
Mm,
like oh, this is just in perpetuity and it's just never going to stop. So
yeah.
not in a reassuring way, but to give people some realistic kind of like timelines as well of some things.
Yeah.
In some cases, in this case,
Yeah.
I think it helps to make them see that hey, okay, like you don't like you still have the choice, but also you don't have to make it right now.
Yeah.
In cases like this, it's
Yeah.
important to like have some frame of like okay, this is how much we can see it, and then we can see where we go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also understanding, what OCD is going to try and do in these moments, jobs, careers, relationships, health. Like by default, that alarm bell signal is firing off in the brain, right? Especially with OCD, that gut instinct is being hijacked, right? And it's going to try and interject and intercept all of those different things, especially with the job. So, I remember I've taken jobs in the past and I thought it was something that I wanted, and it's going to like switch off that mechanism that makes you really doubt it and makes you want to get out straight away. So I think that's when that life acceptance of OCD also comes in as well with the jobs, with the relationship. More than likely OCD is going to try and give us an excuse to pull away from that because we don't have that right feeling or the right sensation. And I think it also comes down to not always doing things based upon how we feel. Yes, again, I know you said, Mom, and there are some cases when we do need to sort of get out of a job or a
Yeah,
relationship if it is very bad, but more than likely it is just sticking the course and doing things even when we don't feel like it, and also weighing up the pros and cons of those different situations. Maybe a
yeah.
job, there might be certain pros and cons to that job. Maybe it's a decent wage, maybe it's near to where you live, maybe you've got good colleagues there, and it's also not navigating it based off of those feelings alone, especially
I think
with the relationship. Yeah, go
Yeah, I think in
on.
over the last 3 years, 4 years,
Mm,
I think there've only been two people where I actually have said, I think this relationship is not working, and
Yeah.
I think you should break up. And it's very rare. And I said this to someone just about a couple of weeks ago, and it's
Mm,
very rare for me to ever say something like that, right? But like
mm,
in like it was so obvious that I mean that this was not going anywhere and this was just bad, straight up bad. So
yeah.
I said, look, I was like, look, the decision is yours. In my opinion, I feel like this is like I think this relationship is essentially come to an end kind of thing.
Hmm.
And they were like, I kind of agree with that. So
Yeah.
but that's a very rare thing to happen. You usually don't like do that. So but obviously, like, I think the misconception with OCD is that, oh, because you have a fear, that means it's going to be the solution is non-action forever,
Mm,
right? And that also mimics that fear element of being stuck in something, right?
hmm.
So just because you have ROCD doesn't mean that you can never break up. Of course you can, and maybe it might even be a good option to break up. But again, context and looking at the exact situation matters. The same as um, again, health OCD doesn't mean that you might not have a health issue. Fear of rejection doesn't mean that you will not get rejected by family or loved ones or whatever. Of course, those things can very much happen as well. But yeah, I mean, like we as like people who are trying to help people and guide them through situations, our advice is not always non-action. Like we do sometimes really push people to be like, no, I think this is what you should do. I think another
Yeah.
good example is where usually in relationship OCD, confessing, venting, reassurance seeking is like a big thing where you constantly want to fix problems in the relationship, right? Obsessively. But in one case that I'm working with, she never brings up any issue with her partner,
Mm,
and because it's compulsively bottling it up and not saying anything to avoid conflict and not make
yeah.
the other person unhappy or put them in a bad mood. I was like that myself as well. So for her, like the exposure and the push that I've had to give her is to be like, no, you need to address this issue in the relationship
Mm,
because I feel like in your case, yes, it is like a pertinent issue, and yes, I think you should bring it up. And that's been very difficult for her to do because she's compulsively just brushed everything under the rug. So yeah,
yeah, absolutely. And I think it comes down to also like how beneficial was this for my life, because I remember I had a job where I thought I just had to sort of stay in it, but the reality was is that I was the people that I worked with wasn't very nice. It took me like a lot of time to get to the job, and the money wasn't that good. And sometimes, yeah, at that certain time in life, there are going to be the disadvantages that outweigh the advantages. Whereas previously, it might have been the advantages way outweigh the disadvantages, right?
yeah.
So it's going to be that moving part across jobs, relationships. There's going to be lots of change as we grow, as we adapt, as we learn new things. We might find that we outgrow a certain situation, or we
That's a
might
good
find that,
point. That's a good
yeah,
point because I mean, just because the job is good for you right now
yeah,
doesn't mean it will be later, and vice versa.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely, and a relationship as well. Sometimes
Yeah,
you grow apart. Sometimes the interests might change. Maybe you have different things going on in life. Maybe you have to travel a lot, and just the practicalities of it don't always work out. So, yeah, OCD aside, there is always going to be that life element that's always going to be there in the background as well. So, I think that's why pros and cons, and not necessarily looking at the feelings all the time is going to be beneficial. And yeah, sometimes it can be for the best, and sometimes it can be for the worst, and you won't really know until hindsight and you look back. But that's the only way you can really learn from your experiences and bring that forward. What
yeah,
worked at that time, what didn't, and it's almost that process of iteration that you have in your life by default going forward, which is okay to have as well. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. No, for sure. Um, and again, I think that that's exactly why, like, trying to just recover from, like, I don't know, just only watching videos
Mm,
isn't enough because again, like some of that advice, I mean, I know that's a fear for people as well that no, this doesn't apply to me. Um, Obviously, you have to think about what are the principles you think are not applying to you because usually most principles do. But yes, of course, like, I mean, it's hard to be like, okay, now I'm just going to apply this to myself, because the situation and context can be very different as well. And you have to be able to like pinpoint a bit more, and not just be like, oh, I'm just going to take this like blanket advice and just going to apply it to myself, kind of thing. So yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's really important to keep in mind when you're trying to discern between what if and real life scenarios. And by the way, like, we have a lot of people that come in who have actually been through really bad life situations as well,
Mm.
while or are still going through bad life situations while dealing with OCD. So naturally, then you have to be able to toe that line between, of course, giving people realistic guidance as well as to what they can do about navigating that real life
Mm.
situation, while also not giving too much into their fear element as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's also important to remember, like, even in recovery, there's still that uncertainty element that's never really going to go away, because, by default, we have a doubting disorder. There's lots of things that remain out of our control. And it's not like, oh, you recover and then everything is sweet. There is still going to be that life element that happens around that, and all those decisions that we have to make in the day-to-day life, whether it's job, whether it's relationship, whether it's health, that is still going to be there. Just because you recover, that doesn't necessarily immune you from that. It's just you become more rational, I think, about the actual
Yeah.
the fears, and you're able to balance things in your head a lot more because it's not really coming from that lens of fear anymore. And I think it helps to get to that point. It really helps to take it off a pedestal, right? So your career, your relationship, your health, as you become more rational about those things, I think what happens is in your mind, you take it off of that pedestal, the neediness to have a good relationship, the neediness to have a good job, the neediness to have good health. And I think as you break that down and the dial, you turn that down, you become a little bit more flexible and you're like, yeah, okay, if I'm in the wrong job, it's not the end of the world. If I'm in the wrong relationship, it's not the end of the world. If I die, then I die, I'm going to die as it is. And I think that also really helps as you become more flexible around those things. There's that internal pull to get it right comes down,
Yeah.
and I think that makes you a lot better to make a decision. Yeah.
I was just like the one-to-one I had right before doing this with you. I was explaining to her like a real life challenge that I'm going through currently.
Mm.
Just a lot of like moving parts in different contexts of like um just confusing things that I don't have the answer to right now, and they obviously they do concern me and worry me as well. But then the only difference is that one, I'm not seeing it as the absolute end of my life. Secondly,
Mm.
I'm not adding a second or third layer of like I should not be feeling this way. So then the initial problem itself becomes far more easier to deal with
Mm.
compared to if I was adding layers of I should not be feeling this way, then that would become even more intense and anxiety inducing for me. So and I'm quite, I mean, I think all of us are quite open about, those things as well. I think like you and I, when we were speaking to someone yesterday as well, like we were highlighting like some of your life challenges
Mm.
currently as well. So, and I think it's
Yeah.
important to highlight that for people too, so that it doesn't seem like, oh, like recovery means life is perfect. No, you just become more self-sufficient, and I guess
Yeah.
that's a good word, I would say.
Yeah.
Become more balanced in your approach with things. You're not like you're not feeling like you're emotionally just completely falling apart and unable to make sense of anything.
Yeah, I think that emotional volatility is a word that comes to mind. You're a lot more stable,
Yeah.
and there isn't that there isn't that internal pull that you have to figure this out right now, and there's not that sort of hyper awareness of the way that you're feeling about things. You feel very sort of detached from like your emotions at times because you know that they're not always the
Yeah.
best thing for you, and you're better at sitting with that discomfort as it does come up. So yeah, there's still going to be life challenges even with recovery. There's still taxes to pay, boilers still break, there's still dating and relationship issues and work
Yeah.
troubles, and it's not this happy go land where you're throwing your hands up in the air. Like I said in the voice note the other day, there's no plane to
Yeah.
there's no plane to catch or there's no boat waiting for
Yeah.
you. There's still going to be all these things happening around you, and I think that helps to bring it off that pedestal as well and stop seeing it as a destination, but rather just a process of becoming more rational, and you become your own coach in many ways. I think as well as you learn, the rational insights and
Yeah.
perspectives. Yeah, you become self-sufficient, and you can lean on that in those moments in your life. Maybe an event happens, and you almost get the toolbox out in a way, and you sort of lean on that acceptance that you've developed, and it doesn't come with that same sting anymore. You're able to diffuse those things when it does come up, and I think that's a great thing to have as you get more accepting.
I've
Yeah,
I've actually had that in relationships as well, because
yeah,
if I'm going through, like whatever stress or whatever it is, I don't feel the need to reach out to my partner or
mm,
anything like that. And it's not that I it's not out of dislike, it's not out of that, oh, I don't want to share with them. It's just like in my mind, I'm like, they're not going to give me any helpful advice, and or like I just feel okay just dealing with something on my own, and I
mm,
feel like sometimes they can also feel like I'm slightly closed off about those things, but I'm not.
yeah,
I'm not being closed off. I'm okay to share those things, but I don't feel like I have to rely on someone else to solve that problem, which is a good feeling. Um,
yeah.
and I'm usually then in the relationship, I'm usually the one just listening to their problems or trying to comfort them and support them and whatnot. But yeah, it's not the other. It's not mutual a lot of the time. Yeah,
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think when you try and deflect your rational insights on other people, like we say, it's like fighting a losing battle, with, isn't it? And I know there is that element of maybe loneliness that comes, not loneliness, but that element of almost too much, and you can see the irrational insights that other people have. You don't
yeah,
disassociate with that, but you're very comfortable in your own perspectives and your own opinions, and you don't
yeah.
really like to venture down the garden path of that irrational mindset that other people have, which is understandable. I'm not saying that you can't have connections still, but
Of course.
it's nice. It's nice to really have that base layer of acceptance and that you can lean on throughout your life, and whatever comes up, whether it's a boiler breaking or a work trouble, you're able to sort of unpack that quickly and look at that belief system, what is causing that disturbance, and then it diffuses in the moment. You carry on like nothing really happened. Whereas before, without those rational tools, you get embroiled in the cycle. You add the shoulds, you add the must, and that's when it gets worse. That's when the waters get muddied, and that's when you go down the compulsive route in many ways. So that internal
Yeah,
framework does come down, which is such a great thing.
yeah. I think like it's I forgot my point. I was thinking to say
That's
something, but completely slipped my mind. But anyway,
all right. Yeah.
yeah, I think that's we've covered quite a lot of points on there with this topic. I'm glad we did this topic. I think
Mm,
this is an
a
interesting
good one.
discussion. I
Yeah.
enjoyed this, yeah, for sure. But yeah, we will. Elliot and I were just also saying before this video, we'll probably do a video that's exclusive for the WhatsApp community as well. So if you want to be a part of that as well, you can always contact us and get in touch with us on our WhatsApp number, which is in the link in the description below. And we will see you on another Real Talk. Thanks for being here. Great talking to
See you
you,
guys.
as
Take
always.
care. Thanks, Morgan. Bye.
Bye.